happen for this now. I want everybody to feel comfortable because it's going to be an interesting evening. Mae'n geisio yn neud y cyfarfod mwrdd weithio ag sy'n bosib, ond wrth gwrs yn anodd gan fod dim offer cyfieithu ar y pryd hynny. So we'll try and make it as bilingual as we can, but we haven't got simultaneous translation equipment, so that makes it a bit more difficult. But first of all, can I say how wonderful it is to see so many people here tonight. This really is fantastic. I didn't expect to see, you know, half perhaps of the number of people here, so that is really wonderful. O'n i bai am Sara a Leon, fi'n credu byddwn ni I gyd yma heno, yw di gwir. Oedd hi o'r un sydd wedi mynd ati I sicrhau fod noson yma'n cael ei chynnal. They've been, I think I met them originally in January in Carnarvon, and since then they've been working tirelessly, lobbying the assembly members and all the political parties and so on, and they've done a wonderful job, I think, in getting our conscience pricked, if you like, in terms of this issue, because I think the work that they've done has been really fantastic, and tonight I think Sarah said everything that needs to be said in a way, but on the other side I think we do have an interesting evening for you tonight, because Rday Hopwood has brought the White Book of Carmarthen here for you to sign. The White Book of Carmarthen, unless you know about it, is a peace book. And it's a beautiful book, leather bound, and it will eventually land up in the National Library of Wales and Aberystwyth with the signatures of, we hope, a million Welsh people, people living in Wales who are willing to pledge that they will work for peace. And in that way it is quite a serious decision to sign the book. So we only want people to sign who really believe in peace. And I'm sure tonight this audience is one that is obviously here because we are concerned about peace and the world we're living in at the moment. Started in 1914, beginning of the First World War. So we're coming up to 100th birthday in 2 years' time. Started with an English Quaker and the chaplain of the Kaiser in Germany, shaking hands in Cologne station just before the beginning of the First World War, saying to each other that as brothers in Christ they would not kill each other. And that was the beginning of the movement, which has grown now into 47 branches worldwide, and because it's a faith-based movement, we have Muslim branches in Bangladesh and in Palestine, and we've got Jewish branch in Israel, and we have a Jewish branch as well in the United States. And we have Christian branches, of course, all over the world as well, and a Hindu branch in Nepal.
Diolch yn fawr Adfon. Rwy'n falch I gynrychioli ECND Cymru yma heno ac I ddatgan ein cefnogaeth fel mudiad i'r ddeiseb hon ac i'r ymgyrch fydd yn cychwyn yma heno. I don't know if you feel it, there's something of the heat and fervour of a revivalist Christian meeting here this evening. There's a cymod, people might understand that better than some others of us. But as the first person before you, it's my opportunity to testify. I testify, as many people do on these matters. The Temple of Peace is quite frequently mistaken, nominally, for the city temple, half a mile away, quite a different institution, different purposes. But many is the time that in a former existence when I worked in this building, I had to redirect people. So, as if I were myself in the wrong place this evening, I'm testifying in front of you. And I have two things to testify. I too as a 14-year-old, was a member of a school cadet force. Those who know me well are certain that it warped me. And the warping process is the reason why I'm here this evening, because it was not enjoyable to be forced to do that. It was not a character building exercise to be on the Brecon Beacons at firing ranges. And although it may not have really hit me at the time, I would not be surprised that that worked away at me over the years, to the point where, as you can see, I have many misgivings about what that represents. It is utterly unacceptable that Britain is the only country in the European Union, the only member of NATO, the only one of the club of 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, that allows children, that allows people under the age of 18 to join the armed forces, and which recruits specifically for that age group. That, I think, is a measure of how out of sync the United Kingdom is in terms of that issue, and something we need to point up as something to be rather ashamed about as part of this petition. In my former existence in this building for the United Nations Association, we often undertook children's activities pointing to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Fantastic document, principles are wonderful, easily graspable key points in that convention. And the notable one in terms of what we're talking about this evening is Article 38. Erthygl 38. Ni ddylai llywodraethau adael I blant dan 15 oed ymuno ar fyddin. Article 38, governments should not allow children under the age of 16 to join the army. So, the strict letter of the UN gave a largely clean bill of health on many things, something to do with corporal punishment. Yeah, Britain wasn't quite in line on that. But on this issue, it expressed strong disapproval and reservations on the continuing active recruitment in the UK of 16 and 17-year-olds to the armed forces. And it also pointed out the inadequacy of the very point that my future son-in-law mentioned, the limited window of rethinking, bailing out for those young people, should they, when faced with a little more of what it might entail, wish to pull themselves back from their commitments.
That this petition is, in one meaning of it, symbolic, although we are asking we have to change the words, because now we have to say to urge the Welsh government to stop the recruitment of young people into the army, because of the fact that the Welsh government hasn't got legislative powers over the British Army, and therefore we can't say legislate, we've got to say urge for that reason. And of course that means that we want to avoid this petition, as Stephen said, getting into the long grass of the Assembly and all kinds of excuses coming up that would stop it getting through, as it were. So in that way we change the words to make it as easy as possible to get it through the Assembly. The other thing is that in one sense this is a symbolic act, because what it will show, the number of signatures on this petition will show, is the will of the people of Wales not to want to see the army going into schools to recruit young people. And that will then reflect, I think, with the headmasters of schools and the governors of schools, and also with county councils, who also have responsibilities in this field. I think it is very interesting when you think of it that when there's a teacher strike, the parents will say the children are losing a day's education. Well, in the last month, all the children of the schools of North Wales lost a day of education when they went to Bala, where there was a huge military display for the whole day. And there were tanks and all kinds of weapons there that the children were allowed to see and almost play with. Play with weapons, but that was what they were doing. There are a whole range of careers that are available for young people. Careers in catering, in mechanics, in engineering, civil engineering, and so on. And it's in that way they sell it, not in terms of the fact that these people, these young children, are going to become soldiers. They tend to say, well, you'll become caterers, you know, or you'll become civil engineers, you know, and we'll train you, and we'll pay for your training. I know that in further education colleges at the moment, students can actually decide to follow an engineering course and get paid by the armed forces for following that course, so that in fact they're getting money while they're studying, which is very beneficial for them, and in many ways they feel that they're getting a good deal, as opposed to the other children who decide not to take the money, as it were. And also, if people want the paper petitions, I've got some here that people can take with them and get them signed up and sent back to us at Cymdeithas y Cymru. So that's the beginning of it. We're finishing the petition on the 24th of October. Now, we've chosen that date because the 24th of October is United Nations Day. And because we are very much aware of the rights of the child, I think that is a good day on which for us to get the petition in. And it will be then handed in to the Assembly, and then we will make a presentation to them at that stage. And we'll try and keep people informed through our website. And of course, Cymdeithas y Cymru has a Twitter, and we've got Facebook, and of course our website. So we can keep people informed in that way, and I'm sure that C&D will do the same.
A philosopher called Noam Chomsky, I've got my former tutor here, so careful to get the quotation right, said that the state does not have a moral function, it's there to serve the interests of the corporate elite. Now, the state, of course, provides services like housing, health and education. But in this case, what the state is doing, it's reaching its long arm, using infinite financial resources, as Alan just said, to use propaganda to seduce and entice young people into the armed forces. Now, I was looking at the webpage before I came here, and it mentioned some of the things that Aaron just said about a career prospect, the good wages, but it doesn't mention the fact that up to 10% of our prison population is full of people from who have left the armed forces, and when they leave the armed forces they just can't cope with the world outside. It doesn't mention the high suicide rates, it doesn't mention the darker side of joining the army. So we're very pleased to be here to work in partnership with C&D Cymru, Cymdeithas y Cymru, the Quaker movement, Plaid Cymru, and we as Unitarians, we believe that every individual is of immense value, but we all have the right to follow our own conscience. But that doesn't mean we give carte blanche to everything, because as John Donne said, no man is an island, and everything that we do affects other people. So we're glad to be here, and we see this as just the beginning. We're grateful to Sarah and Leon for instigating this event, and for everybody for working together.
Thank you. Well, before I say my bit, I've got a brief statement from Leanne Wood, the new leader of Plaid Cymru. Wrgylch yr ystafell dosbarth, mae modd cyflwyno gyrfa yn y Lluoedd Arfog mewn modd deniadol I bobl ifanc sy'n hawdd I moldio yn enwedig lle ni'n nad ydynt yn hyderus y gallan ddod o hyd i waith mewn meysydd eraill. Wy'n bendant o'r barn mae swyddfeydd recrwtio'r weinyddiaeth amddiffyn sydd wedi lleoli ymron i pob un o brif drefi Cymru yw'r llefydd gorau i fynd iddynt os ych chi am chwilio am wybodaeth ynglyn ag ymuno ar fyddin. Yn y rhan fwyaf o weddill Ewrop, nid oes caniatâd i swyddogion recrwtio'r lleoedd arbog fynd mewn i ysgolion. Mae Plaid Cymru wedi lleisio'n gyson a chadarn ein gwrthwynebiad i ryfeloedd hyd yn oed yn Iraq ac Afghanistan. I ni hefyd wedi ymgyrchu chybu ymwybyddiaeth o'r anawsterau sy'n wynebu cyn-filwyr wrth iddynt addasu i fyw tu hwnt i faes y gad. Yn lle bod mewn perygl o fynd i garchar neu o fod yn ddigartre ac yn byw ar strydodd, i ni wedi pwyso'n ddygn mwyn iddynt gael y cymorth dyledus ac angenrheidiol. Dyle unrhyw benderfyniad i ymuno'r lleoedd arfog gael ei gymryd ar ôl derbyn gwybodaeth y tu allan i gatiau'r ysgol. In a classroom atmosphere, a career in the armed forces can be presented as being attractive to impressionable teenagers, especially those who lack confidence that they will be able to find work in other fields. I am firmly of the view that the numerous MOD recruitment offices, which are situated in almost every major town throughout Wales, are the best places for anyone seeking information about joining the armed forces to go. In most of the rest of Europe, recruitment officers for the armed forces are not allowed into schools. Plaid Cymru has been consistent and vocal in our opposition to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have also campaigned to raise awareness of the difficulties former soldiers have in adjusting to life away from the combat zone. Instead of being at risk of ending up in prison or on the streets as homeless, we have pushed hard for them to receive the help they need and indeed deserve. A building most people know as the Temple of Peace, of course. Professor Lord Davis gave this wonderful building to the people of Wales in 1938 as a memorial to, I quote, those gallant men from all nations who gave their lives in the war that was to end war. He fought during the Great War and had seen for himself the pain and suffering that war brings. And so, before I go any further, I want to say what a wonderful tribute it is to his memory and the legacy which he left our people in the heart of what I'm proud to call my home, our capital city, by holding this event here tonight. I'm also glad that this event is taking a different spin, if you like, on the Republican question. There's no escaping the fact that Republicanism is a minority in Wales and throughout the UK, even though its greatest competitor is normally apathy. It is sensible, therefore, that as people who believe in the sovereignty of the people of Wales and in the superiority of peace over conflict, we're showing our disgust at the fact that the armed forces are still permitted to recruit school children into the three branches of the armed forces, and while we are still at war, sending them to fight and often, tragically, to die. Young men and women from all over Wales have joined the army, and after training have been sent to Iraq and Afghanistan. A number of them have come home in Union flag draped coffins. Why? Well, I doubt it's because they understand the political motivations of those who send them to war, and I doubt it's because they really want to protect Queen and country. Joining the armed forces is often seen as being the only way out, especially if you're from a disadvantaged background. Take Merthyr Tydfil as an example. It's one of the poorest areas in Wales, and as it happens, also has one of the highest recruitment rates to the armed forces. In fact, Wales sends more people into the forces than any other part of the United Kingdom. A coincidence, perhaps, or rather a very clever tactic to target young people from poorer backgrounds into what the army will have you believe is an extremely rewarding career. Never mind the fact that after you've seen active duty and you've been discharged, you're extremely likely to end up with mental health issues, possibly homeless or in prison, and with little support during your post-forces life. Wales is a modern country. We may not be the most affluent part of the United Kingdom by far, but in the 21st century, we should be working on developing areas like Merthyr into towns where our young people needn't worry about what they're going to do after school, where they needn't have to make a choice between joining the forces or living on the dole. That's no life, and that's no decision that I want anyone in Wales to have to make. What fascinates me, really, is the fact that the army can go into schools and can try to recruit our young people. But if you're a political party, you have to tread very carefully indeed about what you say in school. Now, I accept that when politicians and political parties speak with kids, there ought to be as much exposure to other views as possible. But shouldn't that also be the case for the army? I remember when I was in my first year of sixth form in Ysgol Gyfun Ysgol in the Swansea Valley, and one of my friends and I tried to set up a branch of Plaid Cymru Youth, or Cymru X as it was then, in school. We gave a presentation during assembly and said that anyone who wanted to come to our meeting could do so. Later that day, we were informed by our head teacher that we couldn't go ahead and set up the group, as a complaint had been received by the LEA, the local education authority, about Plaid Cymru going into schools and trying to politicise kids. I happen to believe that there's nothing wrong with political groups being set up within schools. When I stood for election to Cardiff Council as a Plaid Cymru candidate in Cbay last month, the turnout was a shockingly low 17.6%. I believe that that is because people are leaving schools these days without having had a decent political education. So yes, politics should be allowed into schools so that young people are going on to university or into a job as fully aware and responsible citizens who are ready to fulfill what I believe to be the most important and fundamental of all civic duties. As it happens though, we weren't politicising children. But even if we were, that would be better than what the army does now. We were trying to get young people involved in politics. They tried to get them to sign up, to kill, and to be killed. Don't get me wrong, I do respect anyone who goes to war. To put one's life in danger, sometimes to lose one's life, in defence of an ideal or a country, not just this country, but any country, is an extremely honourable thing to do. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm criticising individual men and women in uniform. What I'm saying is that the act of war, as waged by states against each other, is dishonourable. In this day and age, here we are, still blowing each other to pieces, just as they did centuries ago. As a Welshman who values his freedom, I want to pay respect to veterans who've lost their lives in the line of duty. But as a pacifist, I want to show my belief that peace must come before war. So please don't think that I want to draw away from the huge sacrifice that the armed forces make. The point I want to make this evening, indeed the point that this event is making, is that if any adult wants to join the forces of his or her free will, then that's their choice. Children shouldn't be given a false image of what it is to be in the armed forces. And the armed forces shouldn't be able to go into our schools and recruit children into their ranks. I don't believe in war. I don't believe in international conflict. I accept, however, that at this point in time, it would be dreadfully naive to think that the international community would commit to never again go to war. But what I cannot and do not accept is young Welsh boys and girls, men and women, in our schools being exposed to British propaganda and thinking that their only option in life is to join the army and fight in the name of the British state and the English Queen. Before I finish, I just want to touch on the monarchy. And before I say any more, I want to point out that I use the terms Mrs. Windsor and the Queen interchangeably. After all, one is her name and the other's her hobby when she's not busy entertaining Swazi and Bahraini tyrants. This year, Mrs. Windsor is celebrating 60 years on the British throne. Since 1952, she has been Queen of the United Kingdom, but the United Kingdom, over which she has reigned for 6 decades, has seen dramatic change since her accession. This is the 21st century, but here we are with an unelected and hereditary head of state, who heads a hierarchy of people who are deemed to be senior than the rest of us crown subjects, simply because of the bloodline into which they happen to be born. Here we are preserving this outdated system for the whole of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms, simply because of what is, in effect, English tradition and heritage. Mind you, the cynics here will probably argue that it's German tradition and heritage. I know this event here is to promote the petition against the armed forces recruiting in schools, but as we're just about to have to put up with what will undoubtedly be a sickening display of pomp and pageantry and a wonderful Jubilee celebration weekend, I want to take this opportunity to state proudly and clearly that I support a move away from being a constitutional monarchy, and as a member of Plaid Cymru and chair of Plaid Cymru Youth, I'm in favour of Wales, of course, eventually becoming a sovereign, independent nation-state within the EU and as a member of the UN in her own right. But of course, we're here to raise awareness about the fact that the armed forces are still recruiting young people in our schools here in Wales. I'm very proud to support this event and to support the petition which is being launched this evening. I'd like to congratulate the organisers for organising the event, and I would urge you all to sign the petition and lobby your assembly members to support the call to ban the armed forces from going into schools and trying to recruit our young people. Yng Nghymru'r 11 ar 20, does dim angen i'r lluodd arfog fynd mewn i'n ysgolion a cheisio recrwtio pobl ifanc Cymru i'w plith drosodd propaganda'r dalith Brydeinig o'i blaenau. Nid yna'r Gymru dwi'n byw ynddi, na chwaith hi o'r Gymru dwi am weld. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am eich gwrandawyr.
Mae Caerfyrddin yn enwog trwy Gymru am fod yn gartref llyfr hynna sydd gyda yn yr iaith Gymraeg, llyfr di Caerfyrddin. Wel yma heno mae gyda fi lyfr arall, llyfr gwyn. A'n gobeith ni yw y bydd Cymru yn enwog trwy'r byd am y llyfr hwn. Llyfr yw e sydd yn wahoddiad i ni arwyddo. Yn syml iawn, yrwy fi drwy dorri fy enw yn y llyfr gwyn yn ymrwymo i weithio dros heddwch yn y byd. By signing my name in the Llyfr Gwyn, the White Book, I commit myself to work for peace in the world. It is a symbolic gesture. Tonight is about symbolic gestures, and sometimes we can feel that these are inadequate, but they're not. All these symbolic gestures will eventually turn into reality, and that's a hope we have to hang on to. Arfon said that this is an expression of the will of the people of Wales. Ewyllus pobl Cymru. Dwi'n meddwl mai dyma datganiad o gymeriad pobl Cymru. We are good people. The people of the world are good people. There is no such thing as a bad people. Only sometimes we have bad ideas. And sending children into the army is certainly one of those. Dyma syniad gwael arall hefyd. Militareiddio ein gwlad ni gyd. Does na ddim un cornel o Gymru lle nad yw yr militariaeth ymrysennol. What a bad idea, the militarisation of Wales. There is no corner of our country that is free of the presence of the army. And now, in West Wales, our sky isn't free either. Fy ngwahoddiad I heno, fy nghais I heno, yw eich bod chi'n dod I adlofnodi eich enw yn y llyfr yma. Fel I fod yn llenwi a bod ni'n gallu mynd â fe mas a dweud drychwch, dyma pwy I ni, a gobeithio bod yna bobl eraill dros y byd yn mynd I ymuno gyda ni, achos fe newn nhw, achos da yw pobl fel wedes I. Mae yna ddeiseb arall yn mynd o gwmpas, and I don't want to cloud the issue, but I've had permission just to draw your attention in the back to the other of the Cymdeithas y Cymod petitions. This is coming to an end in 22 days. The petition to stop these drones from flying not only in our skies, but over the world. But we must take care of our own skies in the first place. Felly, dewch os gwelwch yn dda, Bairo di enw yn unig. Mae'n lyfr gwerthfawr, wedi costio lot o arian, mae'n hardd, ond mae'n gwneud y pwynt, a na'n sefyll yma a disgwyl I chi ddod gan ofnodi y ddwy ddeiseb hefyd. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Obviously does not have legislative powers over the British Army or British Armed Forces. They do have powers over education and what happens in the schools in Wales. So I really think it should be maintained at legislature.
Children under the age of 18 are not deemed capable nor competent enough to vote, and yet they can sign away their life for 5 years to the armed forces. So I'm sure there must be some sort of legality, some legal loophole here that, you know, that needs to be sort of explored further.
Whether they will dismiss you. A lot of reports that I've read, many reports from the MOD themselves, said that they never let you out until you do something drastic. So a lot of soldiers, a lot of the psychiatric part of the MOD have seen a lot of soldiers attempting suicide just to get out of it, or self-harming, just so they can be dismissed. And it's that desperate, do you know what I mean?
The military uses
racism as an important tool to recruit. And so while I appreciate the fact that recruiting anyone under the age of 18 is wrong, recruiting anyone to fight in a racist war is wrong as a whole. And so why aren't we talking about how damaging the military is? You know, the fact that more Iraq veterans have killed themselves than have died in the Iraq war. And as a wider issue, we as people all over the world never got anything by asking politely. We didn't go to the man and say, oh, please free us from slavery, or please give us the right to vote. So how is signing up, you know, I appreciate the petition and the idea behind the petition, but how is me saying, oh, please, Mr. AM, please click on this petition, you might want to think about it, and please go to Westminster to please stop recruiting people my age in my school. How is that going to work?
There's going to be at the beginning. You need to, like I said, we have a democratic sphere here in Wales.
Is it really democratic though?
Sorry?
Is it really democratic
Well,
though?
that's what we're testing now. Like I said, we're calling it bluff in a way, aren't we? So, and then, you know, this is just the start of it. You know.
In response to sort of how it can be effective, Cymru X was the predecessor organisation for Plaid Cymru Youth, and we had experience of having a petition against the rise in student fees, specifically things that the Russell Group of universities were putting forward. And we managed to get a petition, and I think it only had about 100 signatures on it. But we got it debated in the petitions committee through the support of my former employer, as it happens, Bethan Jenkins, and got that debated, and eventually the Welsh Government did criticise the Russell Group's policies. So certainly with something like this, getting even more support, if you can get it debated in the petitions committee, you can then get it to the point where it can be debated in the Assembly chamber.
But how is it that 6 million people can march against the war in Iraq, but we expect a petition to stop recruiting kids to kill other people in parts of the world? It's going to work.
Well,
obviously, we show democracy isn't directly working here.
As Sarah says, I think, you know, we're lucky in Wales that we've got this democratic system, and I do believe
We've just
it
been
is
given the
democratic
legislative
system.
powers, basically, last year. So we're testing it now to see, come on, eh?
And if Wales can set the example for other countries, we've achieved an awful lot more than just something in one country. But there's nothing to stop all the things happening at the same time. It's what they do in every movement.
Exactly. There are many sides to the movement, and some are activists, a small group activists very often, but we want also the vast majority of Welsh people to support this, so that we get, you know, people that wouldn't normally do the things that some of us would want to do, but they will sign a petition. So at least then you get the mass movement, as it were, as well as the activists who are doing small things here and there all the time. It's like a honeycomb in a way, where we are all working inside this thing, and it'll finally collapse, you know, one of these days, because we've been working in it, you know, making progress in it. Okay, thank you. Right, sorry.
Yeah, it was on this same issue really of petition or not petition, because I think you made some really good points.
Thank you.
But I just think, you know, if the petition is to take out into the streets and to get people talking about the issue and thinking about it and thinking for themselves about it, then it's a good thing. If the petition is to take to the Welsh Government and say, please do this for us, in other words, we don't need to think about this, then it's a bad thing. So the petition can be a good thing, it can be a good tactic, but we need to do things additionally. And you know, I think if we could find out when the army are going into the schools, then we should be at the school gates and we should be trying to stop them. Look around that school. What do you think about this issue? This isn't about, well, it is about what the Welsh think. We can get their approval, but really it's about what we think, and we should be the ones to say it.
And I think some things are key there, persistence, and that, you know, we're here for the long haul perhaps, but the other thing is being clever and being strategic. And one thing that I was thinking about is that the Welsh Government has to report back, I think it's every 5 years, on their progress on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, if this was questioned last time, I think that 5 years is coming up quite soon. I think we've got a lever there. And I think one thing is to think about what levers do we have.
Thank you very much for that.
Wrote it down here, 53 billion the UN's total budget for all its work is but 30 billion. And the United Kingdom's budget, we have something like 285 trillion. Now, just get in perspective, the amount that we spend on peace, on working for justice, international justice, how few people get involved in the work of working for justice. Don't, how can I put it? I love your enthusiasm, but I'm not sure that going to breaking up recruitment offices is necessarily the way. Education is certainly the way, And so please support the work of the United Nations, for goodness sake. Democratically, let us work for democracy. We don't want to have a sort of anarchy which results in the police justifying their force. We've got to be crafty, as one of the previous speakers have said.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Chair.
That's all right. Sort of finishing about 9 o'clock. I'm going to sign the book, of course, before the end. But I wrote it to you in a long time, so...